All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're happy to have everyone in the audience and be able to start a general government meeting today. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call.
Good afternoon. Let's see here. Councilmember Gonzalez. Here. Councilmember Hamrick.
Here.
Councilmember Jaquez. Absent. Councilmember Meisner.
Here.
Chairman Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Turner.
Here.
And Mayor Troutman.
Here.
All right, I just wanted to give a special recognition to Mayor Troutman's son in the audience. We're so glad that you're here. Mayor Troutman said that you've been shadowing him today, and I think that's really awesome. We're really glad to have you here. Thank you. I guess that former council member Dorito's legacy is living on. He requested that we have a building services review, and so in his honor, we are looking forward to having that today. We'll turn that time over to Kathy and Dina.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just do a little bit of an introduction. So, yes, we've been preparing this as requested by former council member Dorito. Provide a little bit of an overview of the building division and the services provided and how we work with other departments within the city as well as outside agencies. And so I wanted to start, before I turned it over to Kathy, just providing a little bit of an overview to make sure everybody understands what the Building Services Division is comprised of. Kathy Alsh is our building official, and we also have Rob Paulin, who's in the audience today. Rob, shake your hand. He is our building inspector. So there are two different distinct roles within the division. There is overlap, but Kathy is leading the division. And as we saw just Monday evening, was recently recognized for becoming a certified building official. And that means that she's basically running that division, overseeing the budgeting for that division. And part of the efforts leading up to her becoming that certified building official was literally about 12 months of studying all on her own time, taking 3 different modules of exams with 21 separate books, code books, that she was studying and reviewing to take those 3 modules and passing to become a certified building official. So again, congratulations to Kathy. And then a little bit on Rob. Rob joined us in February of this year. He will also be sitting to take tests to become a formal building inspector. In the short time that he's been with us, he's already sat for and passed the first module. And so he will continue to study for and test for the modules to become a certified building inspector. So with that, I will turn it over to Kathy.
Mayor, City Council members, this is a short overview of the building division. To the best of my knowledge, Greg was the first building official for the City of Canyon City. Over the course of my tenure at the City of Canyon City, never more than 3 employees have been employed within the building division compared to other departments within the city. During different periods over the past few years, I have covered the department over the past few years as an official, sole responsible inspector, as well as the payroll manager during staffing transitions and reorganizations. The main purpose of the building codes is to protect public health, safety, and general welfare as they relate to the construction and occupancy of buildings and structures. The building code becomes law of a particular jurisdiction when formally enacted by the appropriate governmental or private authority. Per federal law, it is the responsibility of the state and local jurisdictions to adopt and enforce building codes. Today, most U.S. communities formally adopt a building code and have a system in place for building regulations. Why do we have codes? Insurance industry. They establish standards to minimize accidents and claims. Social organizations eliminate squalor and impact on health. Local governments develop regulations to deliver health and safety to taxpayers. Disasters mitigate loss of life and property based on public demand. Why do we have a building division? Building regulations in the United States began in the late 1800s when major cities began to adopt and enforce building codes in response to large fires in densely populated urban areas. The primary intent of early building codes was to reduce the fire risk, but over time their scope has broadened. Today, building codes are sets of regulations that address structurally integrity, fire resistance, safe exits, lighting, ventilation, and construction materials. They specify the minimum requirements to safeguard the health, safety, and general welfare of building occupants. Why building codes matter. A tornado-safe room was not required by local building codes, but Tom Cook of Joplin, Missouri built one anyhow. It probably, saved his and his daughter's life. The city looked to adopt further building codes and requirements to ensure the safety of their community members. What we do. As a full servicing department, we meet with all types of stakeholders within the city, from all members of the community, business owners, commercial prospects, and to our residential homeowners. We are here dedicated to ensure the safety of our community. Before a building is constructed, repaired, or altered, the property owner is responsible to obtain the necessary permits. Building permits and inspections provide owners, insurance companies, and public the assurance that construction is done in compliance with building codes and local ordinances. These standards are intended to protect the integrity of the buildings and welfare of the community. Many times, insurance companies will not even insure or pay after an event if they discover that something was built or altered outside the proper codes. This is some of the commonly permitted work. We do new commercial buildings, commercial alterations and repairs, residential homes, new garages, house additions, sheds, fences, roofs, new windows, remodels, basement finishes. We also issue heating, air conditioning, and mechanical work permits, and decks. A common permit process and timeline. For instance, a new roof is usually, if we have all the information and the contractor is licensed, it usually is a 24 to 48-hour process. Fence permit might be a little longer because we have other approvals that we have to obtain through planning and zoning and engineering. And then windows, again, is about another 24 to 48-hour process. The little permits like that take usually 1 to 5 business days. The new residence is a little more lengthy. Once we have all of the applications submitted to the city with all the correct information, I plan review the plans. There's a routing sheet that needs to be signed off by different entities. They have to obtain a sewer. They also have to go to the fire department to obtain fire department. Engineering and planning and zoning are done through the city. I obtain that information for them. We issue the permit. The typical time frame on a house is 10 to 14 business days. Then it's time for inspections, and at the final, we issue a certificate of occupancy. Common permit processes for commercial application. There's usually an application submittal. Then we have a pre-application meeting with all entities, planning and zoning, engineering. Then we have a plan review process through Colorado Code Consulting. The typical time frame for review is 30 to 60 business days. That's pending on back and forth timelines between engineers answering comments. When the review is all completed, we issue a permit. Then we do all the inspections, and at final, we issue a certificate of occupancy. This is a flow chart that we designed about a year ago to help our commercial applicants know our process. Now I'd like to introduce you to Steve Thomas of Colorado Code Consulting. He is the owner and president of the company, and also Gil Rossmiller. He does most of our plan reviews for the city of Canyon City.
Thanks, Kathy. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Thomas. I'm president of Colorado Code Consulting. Glad to come down and talk to you all about what we do. We're a full-service building department plan review service as well as code consultants. We've been in business since 1999. Prior to that, I was the building official for a small jurisdiction in the Denver area. Some of you may have heard of a place called the City of Glendale. I was a building official there for 18 years and served as the building official, the planning director, the zoning administrator. Anything had to do with development, I was doing. With all due respect, Dina, I like the building side better. I'm not a zoning person. I found that out pretty quickly. But we specialize in small jurisdictions. And the reason I say that is a larger jurisdiction can afford to have the staff to do the proper kind of plan review. And a smaller jurisdiction, such as Canyon City, has limited resources to hire people with specialties in different areas where for a reasonable fee, we can provide, for example, we have a structural engineer that does all the structural reviews for us. We have a mechanical engineer that looks at all the mechanical, plumbing, and electrical work that we do. And then Gil is one of our energy specialists and does those kind of things. So we can provide 4 or 5 people for less than most jurisdictions can do on their own. And so that's the benefit of having someone provide that level of service. And I think you get a better review because, as you know, nobody knows everything. I admit I don't know electrical. That's why I hire somebody that's smarter than me. So we can provide that service for a lot less than a lot of people. Like I said, we've been doing this for since 1999, and we're very involved in the code development process and at the national level. I've served on the Means of Egress Code Development Committee for the International Code Council. Gil has sat on the Energy Code Development Committee. We've had several of our staff also serve on national committees. So we understand the basis behind the code, and so we can help people understand why a code requirement's there and do that. Gil's been doing most of the reviews for Canyon City. I've done a couple. And you have to treat people in a smaller jurisdiction differently than we do in, say, a Denver or Colorado Springs. It's totally different. You can't just say this is how it's done. You got to sit down and talk through things. I had a discussion with one of your citizens yesterday on a project that we're working on, and kind of just discuss, here's what I really need, why we're doing this. This isn't trying to be a pain in the butt. We're trying to make sure that your building's safe and that they're protected. So that's kind of what we do, and would be, I don't know if Gil, you got anything to add? Okay. Be willing to answer any questions that you may have.
Oh, Mayor, please.
You weren't looking my way. You know, I don't mind being demoted, but that's just, anyway. Is it fair to ask what you think, what is your normal, and I guess that's not a proper question, because the dynamics of the project take longer to get done, but this simple project for commercial, what's your timeline roughly?
Our turnaround time for a review is 2 weeks, so 10 business days. And so when Kathy talked about the 30 to 60, we get our stuff back to the applicant within 2 weeks.
Okay.
Then they respond, they go back, make revisions and respond. So that timeline from that standpoint is flexible because it depends on the size of the project, obviously. Then when we get to say we got to do a second review, there are times we can get it done in 5 days, but we still say 10 days just to make sure we can cover it.
And so what you're saying, your communication is with the applicant and you get all that straightened out, then it comes to the city?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the way we work with Kathy is she's let us just deal right with the applicant so
Okay.
that we don't lose any time going,
Yeah.
secondhand and those kind of things, and get it to the end, and then we send Kathy an email and say, everything's good.
And when you're talking about it, obviously you're using our dated code?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
We like to serve as your plans examiner.
Okay.
So I think it's important to note, just to follow up, Steve, that you're referring to your first review. So in
Correct.
terms of the timeline chart that we have here, that's number 4. So once there's a complete application submitted, then Colorado Code Consulting will begin their work, and their initial review is usually that 10 to 14-day time period. But then there's often comments back to an applicant, and so that adds time in terms of the onus at that point is on the applicant to provide the additional information and then provide the additional review time.
I got it, but from day one, they're talking to you and not Kathy?
Pretty
Sure.
much so. Yeah, Kathy directs them to us.
Okay, okay,
Yep.
okay.
Anyone down here have any questions? All right, Meisner.
I'll direct my first one to maybe both of you. I'm not sure, I thought I understood your role in terms of what we were doing, but are you simply doing a review and then all the code enforcement falls back on locally? What's that
Yes.
process?
So we are just reviewing the plans for you. And then Kathy and Rob does all the inspections on it.
Yes, I issue the permit once the review is done. Once that is completed, then I go ahead and issue the permit. They start building. We do all the inspections here.
And then we're available after that, after we give the final thing. We don't just say, oh, we're done with that project, don't talk to us. If there's questions that come up on the job site, we'll work through those.
If this is not the appropriate time, shut me off. I think one of the biggest problems that I hear about is we come in and do an inspection at point A, and we identify issues that need to be addressed. And then we come back later and do an inspection, and we've identified the things at the initial inspection that were corrected, but now we find other things that need to be corrected. And that is extremely frustrating for contractors.
You know what? I don't think I've ever heard of that, Jim. I've never gone out on an inspection and re-inspected the same inspection and found other items. Usually their correction list is their correction list. I mean, you'd have to give me a real example from somebody in a place in order for me to...
Or the only other thing I can think of is it might be a subsequent inspection of another component of the project as the construction is further along, and hence there is another
I
checklist.
understand.
And another benefit of a good review is that Kathy has a good set, the contractor has a good set of drawings to go by, so that if they build to the plans, there should be less type things that Kathy has to call on a project.
Meisner.
So generally, what's the attitude of making what I'm going to call adjustments or changes once that initial review is completed?
If it's not built to those plans and they change their plans without asking,
No, I've got the plans, I've got the review, but now I want to make an adjustment. What's the general attitude of how do I go about getting that approved?
okay, so if it's just a minor adjustment, I can take a look at it and approve it. I think if it's a major adjustment, I would consult with Steve before it's approved.
And are you talking after the plans are approved? Is that what
Yes.
you're talking about?
Yes. I mean, there's always adjustments. Not
Absolutely.
always, but a good percentage of adjustments that have to be made down the line, or things that you recognize down the line that weren't foreseen originally, that have to be adjusted. And again, if I'm out of line or relative to this discussion, the biggest complaint that I hear, and I realize you're not getting this, is that there is a tremendous amount of inflexibility in that process, that this is your plan, this is what you submitted, this is what you approved, and that's what you need to go forward with. I realize that's not what you hear from your end, but that's what I hear from my end. And it's just like Tony says, give me documentation. That's not realistic.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Hamrick.
Thank you. Just a couple questions, Steve. So how many other small communities about do you service?
Oh, great question. I meant to say that. Actually, quite a few. We do Trinidad, Lake County, Leadville, Victor, Cripple Creek, Cherry Hills Village in the Denver area. Let's see, is there any others that we do the whole build? We actually run those building departments. So we serve as their building official and plans examiner inspector. So we do everything for them. For plan review, it's huge. We do plan reviews for Westminster, Lakewood, Littleton. Those are the metro areas. Just got a set of drawings in from Torrington, Wyoming. We've got clients all the way up in Alaska that we do. Great Falls, Montana. And so quite a few jurisdictions that we do plan reviews for. And we're also part of the state Main Street program, if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
We're part of that group that can come in and help jurisdictions with building codes.
Do all of those jurisdictions have pretty much the same code?
Well, Colorado's an interesting place because we have no state code. And so everybody does whatever they want. And so we do plan reviews, for example, for Telluride. They're on the 2003 International Building Code, and they're getting ready to go from the 2003 to the 2018. That's going to be fun. And then, and so it's all over the place on what code, but we review to the jurisdiction's code. And so that's the nice thing about having people that are involved in the code development process. We know where the change has happened and those kind of things.
Okay, another question. Do you provide code-related services? So for jurisdictions that want to improve their codes, do you have anything like a model code? Or, I mean, do you provide code services where you suggest, here's something that works in other jurisdictions or things like that?
Absolutely. We've helped several jurisdictions write their amendments and ordinances. We did Denver, actually worked as their staff for the city of Denver. Telluride, we just finished writing their amendments for them. Of course, all the jurisdictions that we run the building department for, we do all of those. We've done building department reviews, those kind of things.
Can you tell me a little bit about, some of the towns that you mentioned, I know have a lot of older buildings, and sometimes very old buildings in them, and that's always a challenge, it seems to me, in terms of ensuring public health and safety, and trying to balance that sometimes with financial resources of people that are trying to improve a building.
Correct.
And do you see a lot of variation in what the different jurisdictions do in terms of the older buildings and full compliance with code versus perhaps there's a more limited review for older buildings or something?
Well, we definitely have experience in historic buildings and historic areas. We also do Central City. That was one I forgot to add. So when you look at Central City, Cripple Creek, Victor, Leadville, they're all historic sites. And the one thing I learned a long time ago is that it's not my code, right? It's your code. And so you all tell the building department what you want in the ordinance. And as long as we've got something in the ordinance, then we can enforce it. So if a community says, for example, Victor actually had a referendum to get rid of the building department completely. And we came in under the Main Street program and had community meetings with people, and we were able to get people to understand why we need codes, and it is all on how we enforce it, right? And when you look at older buildings and historic buildings, you've got the owner that wants to do what they want to do for as little as they can. As a businessman, I understand that completely, right? Return on investment. Then we got the building code over here that says you got to do this. Our philosophy is to get to yes somewhere in between, right? And so it involves both parties getting together and saying, how can we get a relatively safe building at a reasonable cost? And so we've been pretty successful in being able to do that. Trinidad was the same way. They were ready to lynch their building official down there. And we came in and literally, they brought the rope. And so we were able to go down and calm some things down, and we're now doing their inspections and plan reviews as well.
So tell me a little bit about that process. So if you've got a building owner that wants to do something, but may not have the resources to do it all, and as far as getting to the yes, does that involve the local building code people, the jurisdiction code people, as well as you and the business owner? Do you all sit down? Is that how that works?
Absolutely. So as a consultant, we don't have any authority, right? Kathy's the one with the authority. So if we have anything where we have to look at an alternate design, and the code allows alternate designs and modifications if there's a practical difficulty in carrying out the code, where what we'll do is we'll work with the owner and then come to Kathy and say, hey, we've got this alternate, here's the issues, here's what we think we need to do. In fact, we just did that on community health. Yeah, Valleywide Health, where they had an open stair that under your current code that you have wouldn't be allowed. But a newer code allows it. And so the architect and I had worked through everything, and that was the only thing that was left. And I said, the newer code says this would allow what you want to do. And they went, yep, we know, because they work in Colorado Springs. So we got everything then. We came to Kathy and said, Kathy, here's what we think. Here's what the new code says. We think it's a reasonable alternative, but she has to make that decision. So we were able to get to yes in that particular project.
Thank you.
Yep.
Gonzalez?
Yeah, I just have a question about fees. If we're doing a commercial plan review, is our department collecting anything for plan review?
No.
No, and it all goes to?
It's through us.
Okay. And the customer pays that directly to you?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And different jurisdictions do it different ways. Some jurisdictions, the city collects it and pays us. Other jurisdictions do the same as you are doing here.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I do have a couple of questions. I was curious, with all the municipalities that you work with in Colorado, how is Canyon City doing in comparison?
Better. Based on my, I knew some of the previous people that worked here in Canyon City, and I think Kathy's doing really well to get where she needs to be. Getting the CBO is a huge accomplishment, and that's really important to have, because Dina talked about the three modules. Those three modules are technical, which you would expect, management, knowing how to manage a department. So you've got human resource issues, budgeting, how to write a budget, all those kind of things. And then the legal module. What is her legal right as a building official to enforce the code? What's the right of entry requirements? Those kind of things. So I think that she's doing better than you were doing. Because when you work Colorado's a small state, and you all know that. Everybody talks to everybody. Everybody knows what's going on. And so, you hear what's happening. And so I think it's getting better. You know, it really depends. I think that you're real close to being equal to a lot of the smaller jurisdictions. And part of the issue is it's just funding, right? You only have so much money to put towards that. And so not a lot of small jurisdictions have a lot of money to put towards the building department. I wish they did, being prejudiced, of course, towards building departments. But I think you're getting there, and I think you're pretty darn close.
We in our tour that we did of other, cities recently to Buena Vista and Salida, one of Salida's kind of mantras for older buildings was, if you can make it better than it was before, then we're going to let it pass. Is there any provision within our current code to work within some realm in that?
And excuse me,
Huh?
there was an important caveat on that, and that is as long as it's not life critical.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
thank you for that.
And that's what the code basically says. We're concerned about life safety. When you walk into a building, you expect that if something happens, you can get out and that you're not going to get injured. And that's really the basis of the code is, there's a question, what is a safe building? Well, we can build safe buildings if we build them all out of concrete and masonry and those kind of things. Well, that's not practical. So when it comes to existing buildings, what the code says is that any work I do, any new work I do, has to comply with the current code. And you can't make the building worse. Now, if you happen to change the use, let's say from a business to a restaurant, what the code then says is now we got to do some things to improve the building to comply with the new use. Because if you think of an office building and the hazards that are involved in an office building compared to that of a restaurant or a nightclub, I'm sure you all remember the fire in Rhode Island at the Station nightclub. That was an older building. It wasn't sprinklered. They lit off fireworks when they shouldn't have. The walls were covered in a foam sound insulation, like packing foam, burns really fast. When you look at the video of that fire, there was smoke around people's heads within 15 seconds, right? And so we lost 100 people in that fire. And so the code after that said, you know what, we need to look at this. And the code now was changed so that if you have a restaurant or a nightclub that has an occupant load over 100, you got to provide fire sprinklers. And that's usually the big issue in a jurisdiction in older buildings is putting fire sprinklers in. We've been successful in some areas to say, okay, instead of, and Kathy gets the final decision, but I'll just tell you what we've done in some jurisdictions. Instead of doing sprinklers, do a complete smoke detection system, which means smoke detectors throughout the entire building tied together, and then if one alarm goes off, everybody in the building gets notified. So now we have early warning. Now we get people out of the building soon enough that they're not hindered by a potential fire or whatever may occur. And so those are the kind of things we've been able to work with, kind of back to your question earlier, of trying to work with that building owner to get to a point where we're not worse than it was, but hopefully we can get, in some cases, better.
Okay. Dina, when a little bit into your tenure here in Canyon City, I know you've been here just over a year, I remember we were having a lot of conversations about needing to update the code, create more flexibility in the code, streamline the process for permitting. And I remember you had our code and it was full of tags and that I think you had marked of, you had lots of ideas.
That was the
of ways
subdivision regulations.
to do. Okay, well, I just
Yeah, please
remember-
don't confuse those two.
Yeah, so two separate things. But we had conversations about this, but we've really been struggling to move forward in doing that. Are we in a position where it's time to maybe look at that?
We are, I think when I started, there was a significant amount of staffing change within the overall department. And so that consumed a great deal of time. That's now settled down a bit. And now, the most recent change actually was in building division with Rob joining us in February. which allowed Kathy to really focus a little bit more on some of the broader picture things. And in fact, we are meeting tomorrow afternoon to discuss updates to all of the permit application packets. And so that's the first step that we're working on. I actually had done markups about 6 months ago, and we just haven't been able to get to it. So the goal is, as part of the Opening a Business 101 session that we are nearing completion on and hoping to have perhaps something in July, that we will also be able to roll out the new permit application packets at that time as well. And so hopefully those are a little bit more updated and streamlined as a first step. And then I think we need to then start having the discussion about, do we want to start talking about updating the building code? And if so, what is that realistic time frame to have work sessions and do that? And, what would be an ideal goal of adoption of an updated code? Or do we want to stick with our current code for a while longer? So, and in terms of some of the other streamlining the processes, we will continue to have conversations about that as well. We've talked a little bit about that to date as well. And, part of that also includes being able to accept credit cards for application fees and simple things like that. So those are all things that are on my list to discuss.
Okay.
And if I can just add quickly, if you go to a newer code, one of our other services is education. I actually teach building codes all over the country. And Gil also teaches all over the country. And so, we could come down and do a session with all your contractors and local architects on what changes are occurring from your current code to a code that you adopted. So we can provide that, help there as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from council?
I do have one.
Henrik?
I want to follow up with Kathy. My question is, I think Ashley was trying to ask this, and the question is, do you know of places in the code where right now your hands are tied, where someone might come in and say, hey, I can make this better, but the code says, no, we've got, it might be an area where there's, where we could have some flexibility, or you could have some flexibility, except for the code. Do you know of places like that? In other words, it's the make it better question. If somebody comes in and says, boy, I want to make my building better, but your hands are tied by the code, are you keeping a list of those areas or something?
Actually, since I have taken over, I have not seen one of those. And I've dealt with several people downtown, and we have not run across anything. In fact, I'm working with another person that's trying to buy, it's a huge lot with 3 buildings down there, and he's trying to turn it into a restaurant, and he brought in something showing me, he wanted to know if it had to be sprinkled, and we went through a lot of the things, and there was no problems whatsoever. And I've not seen one yet, but I'm sure some will arise along the way.
Thank you. And
There's-
I would ask if you do run across those, make sure you let us know, Dina know, Tony knows, so that council can assist in those areas where we can.
And there's 2 sections in the code, one for what they call alternate designs and methods and materials, which allows you, the idea of the code is not to keep people from being able to use materials that they want to use. So if somebody wanted to use a different material that's not in the code, that section allows Kathy to evaluate that. And if it meets the intent of the code and safety levels, then that she can approve that. Modifications is also the option where there is a practical difficulty in carrying out the code. There's just no way we can comply with the code. Kathy also has that authority to approve that, but once again, it needs to meet the intent and meet certain requirements. So there's some flexibility built into the code that way.
Meisner?
I'll make it quick. You said that Canyon City's doing better. What does that mean? That we're enforcing the code better, or we're better at providing customer service?
I'd say both, actually. Because I can tell you from what I hear from people all the time, builders, architects, those kind of things. And from what I heard prior, and I didn't hear a lot, it wasn't like every day everybody's, oh, do you know what's going on in Kansas City? But you hear it occasionally, every once in a while. And, maybe we're not hearing that now because we're doing the reviews for you, I don't know, but.
Could be.
It could be, but, I'm not hearing those kind of things. And that's kind of where I base my comment on is what I'm hearing from your constituents.
One quick question. and
All right,
I think I'll
let's do it. So we can
Okay,
move on.
so here's another scenario. As a contractor with an approved plan, I call you and I say, I've got a question about this specific, let's call it task. Can you come down and give me your opinion? What would be your response?
I would set up a time to meet with them.
Okay.
That's what we have been doing. We'll meet them on site. They can come into the office.
So you can help guide them and lead them in the right direction and give them options?
I realize you're not a consultant, and I don't expect
Correct.
that, but
We can't draw plans
Right,
for them and,
right.
but we can go down there, we can show them, in the codes, there's commentaries that show a lot of pictures. And what I've done in the past is made copies of pictures so the individuals can look at them and see what they need to do.
like you did with me.
Yeah.
Jim, and probably the two best recent examples were the movie theater and the special events annex. In both cases, there were requirements the fire department wanted to impose, which would have made it almost cost prohibitive for either one of those businesses to do what they wanted to do. But Kathy, working with Steve and others, were able to mutually come up with win-win scenarios. And unfortunately, the movie theater people, even after we came up with that win-win, decided not to invest at that time. But on the other hand, the special events annex did proceed with the proposed modifications without having to put in fire suppression systems, cost them a tremendous amount. And as a fledgling business, that would have probably put them under. So, I mean, those are two good examples where we tried to create a scenario that we protected the public's life safety, but still met, the needs of that individual business.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
Oh, can I just have
Sure.
one question? I wondered if there are issues or areas that you think we could provide some more public education on, or things that you think people are most likely to be confused about? Are there areas like that you run into and see?
I haven't, because when they're on individual case by case, we just touch base with that individual and try to work it all out, whether it's on the job site or in the office or in a conference with their architects, engineers. Just to give an example, Journey Home, they were at their final. They have these special window locks on all their bedroom windows, which then wouldn't allow them to meet egress. In the 2015 code, they are allowed. And so in that case, I allowed them to do an alternate method of materials. And that is what we would go out, and we went through the whole scenario with the architect on site. And he said, I will draw up the letter if you will accept it that way, and I did accept it.
Okay.
And the most confusing thing is when you start changing codes. Nobody likes change, right? And they're afraid of the new code. And I don't even like to use the new code, updated code. It's the same code, it's just updated. And so there's that fear of that new requirement. And so that's why we offer the option of coming in and doing a half day on the building code, half day on the residential code, talk about those changes so that they know. I find most contractors and architects, if they know the rules of the game up front, they can play it. It's when we change the rules halfway through the project that makes them frustrated. And so.
And we definitely heard about that on our tour in Buena Vista. Folks who had that happen to them, and
Yeah.
so tough on business to do that. So.
Yeah.
So I have a question, I'm sorry. Can
Go
I-
ahead.
Well, Jim had asked if there were any things that needed to be changed through the process. If something has been approved and then later it was changed. Are windows not part of that? So would they not have known to put the lock on that window at Journey Home?
They never gave it to us up front, but we checked the window at final. We can't open them, they were casement windows.
Okay.
So during framing inspection, they don't have all the hardware on them, so we couldn't roll them out to check them.
Okay, and I think those are little things that set some people back in his question. You know, sometimes we get down the road and things change. So you were able to accommodate them, but has that happened before where they've had to tear something out and redo it because it didn't meet the code and you weren't able to amend it or adjust it?
In the 15, almost 16 years that I've been in the building division, I've never made anybody tear anything out.
Okay.
I've never seen that. There's always been some kind of accommodation.
Okay, good.
All right, I think. Let's make it quick, Miser, we need to move on.
I just want to publicly disagree with that statement. I can show you factual information to that case, but I'm not sure that's an accurate statement.
Well, I think it's important to maybe clarify, I mean, if it's based on approved drawings and doing an inspection according to approved drawings, if something doesn't meet the approved drawings, that's one thing, right? So
Well, and that was-
we'd want to know more about those examples.
That was my question is, are those windows not on the approved drawing?
They are, but the latches were not. It was a special latch when you rolled it out that only allowed it to open 4 inches.
I see. Okay.
So an egress window out of a bedroom so that you can get out in a fire has to open at least 20 inches wide, right? And 24 inches tall, and there's some other stuff, but that's all that technical stuff. Since we have had kids falling out windows over the years, the code's been updated to say, wait a minute, if your window's over a certain height, 6 feet above grade, then the window can't open more than 4 inches, right? And so that's the latch that they bought that window with, that kind of a latch. Your code, since it's a little behind, doesn't have that language in it. And so as far as keeping kids from falling out of the windows. So that's what I'm assuming, I don't know the case, but, yeah. And so you look at that and you go, now what do I do? It doesn't meet the 20-inch minimum width. And so I'm assuming the latch then opened and they could open it the rest of the way. And that's basically what the current code says.
Okay. And to approve that, you consulted with Gil before? Okay.
Yeah, I had him read the letter from
Okay.
the architect that I wanted to make sure I thought it was well-written from the architect with all the backup on it. And I sent it to Gil to see what he thought of it, and he thought it was great as well.
Okay. Now, one more quick question, I'm sorry. With that letter, does that just allow that building to have those
Yes.
window locks and no other building? Okay.
Right.
All right.
It's per case,
Okay.
you know, whatever the situation is.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
know you want to get going. I need to tell you, Gil was a building official in Parker for 13 years, so he's got some small-town experience as well.
All right, well, thank you. I'm really glad that we got to meet both of you in person. We've only seen your names on paper and situations that really it helps to have a face-to-face conversation.
I agree 100%.
And thank you for taking the time to come down and
No
meet
problem.
with us. I know you guys are busy, and
Not a problem at all. I'd rather come down and meet you in person and tell you what we do.
it's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you.
your contributions to Canyon City. All right, do you have more for us under this?
Yes. I would like to have Ryan talk about our 2018 Building Division survey results. He conducted the survey for the Building Division.
So the Economic Development Office did a customer service survey on the building division. We sent out a survey along with a stamped envelope, return envelope, to 307 licensed contractors. That's what we have on the approved contractor list. We received about a 15% response rate, which was 47 contractors. As you see on the screen, and the wording's a little bit small, but the blue was strongly agree and agree versus the orange, which is disagree or strongly disagree. So staff displayed a positive attitude, 91% agreed or strongly agreed. Building department staff responded to my inquiry in a timely manner. Again, 91% strongly agree or agree. Building department staff was helpful, knowledgeable, and professional. 89% agreed or strongly agreed. Staff provided clear and concise information. 83% felt strongly or agreed with that. I'm treated with courtesy when dealing with the building division. Again, 91% strongly agreed or agreed. The building division tried to help me through the process. We saw 74% strongly agreed or agreed. 13% was disagree or strongly disagree, and 13% marked not applicable. And then my inspections were performed in a timely manner. 79% strongly agree or agree. 15% were not applicable, and 6% disagreed or strongly disagreed. So overall, it was a strong customer service survey. We had some comments as well, but overall, it was very strong for the building division.
Through those comments, we're able to see ways for improvement. Because I say there's a lot of strong numbers here, but also 74%, 78% isn't. I mean, you can see some room to improve.
Sure. Yeah, and we had comments. Building staff was great. That we had some comments where there's some disagreements, and the building division has those comments, so they can try and make those improvements.
Any comments from council? Okay, what's next?
Okay, here I just have permit fees, city audited use tax, and permits issued. I did just a 5-year, so you could see what has been happening over the last 5 years. And
Is the spike in 2017, is that from the hospital, or?
Well, we did have a spike. St. Thomas More MOB was a $5.2 million project. We also had Journey Home, which was a $4.5 million project. So we still, if we would have taken those out of the equation between 2016 and 17, we still would have had a 31% increase.
Do you have any projections for 2018?
I don't. Not at this time. It's been really busy, though.
I think we're about the same course as 17. It's going to be a very strong year, both in commercial and residential construction.
Okay.
Far above the historical average for the last 5 years.
So,
One of my requests was for some state comparison information that you and I had in a meeting.
Yes.
Where are we at with that information?
We have it from, in fact, Ryan, I thought we had provided it to you to some of our staff meetings, but we can provide that again. I think we looked at the Salida County area.
Yeah,
we looked at Pueblo County, Pueblo West, and in looking at the data on a per growth basis, we were ahead of those entities.
Excellent.
We can re-provide that to you.
Okay. Are there,
that's it. Is there any further questions?
any further questions from this side? All right, well, I'd like to thank each of you for your participation and for your education. It's been really good to know and learn more and be able to ask questions. We appreciate it. Look forward to our future conversations on our building codes. So thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on to our wayfinding signage. Patrick, do you want to come up front too, since you're part of that decision-making committee? Dean, are you taking the lead?
Yeah.
Okay, shifting gears.
So, wanted to come to you, provide a little bit of an update on where we are with the signage and wayfinding design for the community. A little bit of background. I know we have some new council members here, and so I wanted to provide a little bit of background in terms of some of the history of where we are getting to today. Basically, about a year ago, or maybe a little bit more, it was before I started, a committee of business owners, Chamber of Commerce representatives, council representatives, and city staff created and/or modified from previous efforts, ultimately reviewed and then recommended some designs for Conceptual Gateway to council. The first meeting on that was the 29th of March last year, and then there was a presentation to council at a general government work session on June 7th of last year, and at that time council provided direction, and that's the images that you see here. So then, continuing on from that, the next step was to put together a request for proposal, an RFP, to solicit interest from consultants to do the detailed design work. And so that happened in fall of winter of 2017. With that, Tangrim Design was retained and selected, and their contract amount is $24,630. So in terms of the budget for this work, in 2018, there's $400,000 that's budgeted for final design and construction. That includes the design fees that we're paying to Tangrim for their work. The consultant began their work in January of 2018, and the goal is still to have a first phase of signage constructed this year. So just a reminder that all of these efforts are in support of the 2017 to 2020 strategic plan, really providing support the ease of use for visitors and providing identity and branding for the community. There's 5 specific components that I pulled out of the strategic plan that this effort supports. So there's really 2 types of signage that's being designed. First is monument signage, and the second is directional and wayfinding signage. And there's really 2 subsets to the monument signage, as you will see, gateways, so the community gateways, and then district gateways. So I'll walk through each of those in more detail. So first, the monument signs. So the monument signs are meant to be primary gateways. The first one at the eastern entrance to the community. This is an illustrative of, this is US 50 coming into town from the east. And this is the general location for that eastern gateway sign, very close to where the previous sign was that was recently moved. And the monument sign, and then moving to the western gateway, so coming in from the west, this is basically US 50 coming down and around the curve coming into the community. The initial work on this, the US 50 quarter plan, had initially identified in this red box here the proposed location for the western gateway, and through the efforts with the consultant has suggested moving that to where the gold box is here. So basically on the opposite side of US 50 and a little bit further kind of uphill as you're coming into town, and you'll see that in some of the upcoming imagery.
Do you want to explain why? Because they had some justification for that change that I thought was valid.
They I guess they had a concern that having the sign across the highway would make it more difficult for people to see as they're coming into town. And even though the curve of the road is heading eastbound, they still felt that that folks coming into town would still look to their right and be more inclined to identify with a gateway sign on the right side of the road than across the highway on the left side.
But it also wouldn't have the obstacle of oncoming traffic blocking your view to see the sign.
Yep. And so then in terms of a secondary gateway, we also talked about places like the intersection at 15th, where we currently have a monument sign, that would be an opportunity for a scaled down version of the monument sign to be placed. So moving into the imagery and where we are with the design. So in terms of the Eastern Gateway sign, and I'll go through
several different options for all of these, and then we'll come back and see them, all the different options for each of the types on one slide, so you can look at them holistically.
Dina, can I just interrupt for just a second?
Yep.
I wanted to make a little bit of a clarification, especially for those who were here in June of 2017 when we originally approved a certain design.
You and I.
Based in Preston, on the citizens committee that met together. And then when Tangram came in and we gave them, our design, there were some concerns because parts of our design did not meet CDOT standards. Number two, the part of the design also was really costly and expensive and would probably look like a big cement block that had just been poured into a frame or something. And so they asked for permission to maybe look at some enhancements. First of all, we had to come into CDOT compliance on their standards, but maybe something a little more cost effective and a little bit more aesthetic as well. And so Christy Gotham, who designed the original sign with the committee, she agreed that she wanted to see some improvements made, and we wanted to see what they had, and so we could compare it to the original, to what the professionals, engineers, and designers felt like we needed. So that's why things look a little bit different. So I just wanted to let you know that up front.
Right, yep, good point, that was a conceptual design, and now it's about making it real.
So I have a question. Are any of these designs of the old design?
So, yeah, so I'll go back here.
Yeah, this
Bree.
is really close, but
Yeah,
it's
this-
a little
all right.
bit different.
Yeah, so this
And
one, the first options that you're going to see here are the closest to the original
The original,
conceptual
okay.
design completed by the committee, and I'll flash back to that here briefly.
Excuse me, Dina, I've got a question. This is just an update, or are we going to be making selections?
I think we wanted to make selections because we've been working on this a really long time, and we have the money set aside. We'd really like to see if we can make the selection, then they'll make the actual designs, all the angles and materials and everything, and then we'll be able to take that and bid it out to actually have some signs made and constructed this year.
Any more study money?
No, that's right. We're like, we
I'm
want to
serious.
make some
Study that.
decisions and get this done. Yeah, this is it.
Okay.
And this will give us a plan, not only for the signs that we want to make and install this year, but for any time we want to have a new sign at a park or a new sign at a trailhead. It has all of those signs designed with all of the specs, and so from now on and into the future, it's already there, ready to go, and send it to the design maker, or to the sign makers.
So just to reiterate, what I'll do is I'll walk through all of the options, and then we'll come back, and all of those options will come up again on a slide so that you can compare the different options, okay? So, and just to remind everybody, this is the imagery, the concept, that design that was done by the committee. And maybe to point out some of the key features of that was the idea of layering, right? So that was one of the key features from the concept design, the idea of layering. The idea of obviously having scalloped edges and tops to reflect the mountainscape and somewhat the gorge in that specific example. And the blue line here was to indicate the river in that concept. So, and that was similar in terms of some of the directional signage, as having those scallop tops, the ideas of layering, and so forth. So you'll see how some of that has been adapted and amended by the consultant as we walk through the different options.
And could somebody hit the lights for us, please?
Create a little more contrast. Which actually, this is a good point to mention. So the one thing I noticed while I was putting this together is,
One.
oh, that was the projector.
Those
Is-
lights right there.
Right above it.
Is that some of the colors that you see here on the projector are not going to be absolutely exact colors that would be constructed. So you have to realize that they're still conceptual, based on how images are adjusted.
Chase, can you come turn the projector on?
Yeah, I seem to be drawing a blank.
I recall doing that myself soon after I started.
How much we pay for this design?
That one's free.
Projector?
I did that one.
Did a good job. The shadowing is
Yeah.
amazing.
It's rather pale by contrast.
So as that's coming up, just to reiterate what
The
Councilwoman
switch- Chase,
Smith.
the switch may actually need to
It's
go
coming
on
up.
over there.
Just to reiterate what Councilwoman Smith had mentioned, that, you know, the options that you see here are not only to comply with CDOT requirements, but also taking into account kind of the basics of good sign design, taking into account costs and other factors. And now it's going to look really dark until it lightens up. So just to start walking through the Eastern Gateway signs. So you can see here the similarities of this Eastern Gateway monument sign to the conceptual design that was provided by the committee. And the idea here is that you still have the layering effect. In this case, it's 2 layers of materials that would be designed sort of into the landscape, so that we know that on the eastern entry, that there's topography that we're working with, and that sign would sort of be built into the hillside, coming into the eastern portion of town. And so there's two options that you see here, simply from a coloring standpoint of the main panel. So the one on the left is basically proposing sort of a brownish, and in conversations with the consultant, we talked about material for this. This is the only material that we've really had a conversation with them on as of yet, and the idea here is that potentially could be Corten steel, and I will provide some images of that here shortly. So the one on the left would be a first panel that would have the words Canyon City on it. What you're not seeing here is below is the opportunity for placement of a future tagline. Since there is still not a consensus within the community of a tagline, the design is accommodating a future tagline, but we're not showing one at this time. So I know it's difficult to see on the slides here, but basically it's an area that's dashed into the drawings, and that might have been more readable in the packets that you received. So this is the concept of the sign would be 2 panels, a front panel with Canyon City on, and a back panel that would be a blue color that would be a la sort of the sky and the mountainscape as the second panel. And then the base to this design would be sort of a buff sandstone in an ashlar format, similar to what's seen currently in the community, and I will also provide some images of that here shortly. So the top image is just an elevation of that proposed option, and then the bottom image here is sort of a very quick simulation of what that might look like in place in the landscape. And so the idea is that you have the first band or component of the sign, the second component as a separate plane that would actually be separated, and then the buff sandstone that would be placed at the base of that and built into the hillside. There could also be, as this is illustrating, we haven't gotten to a detailed landscape that might be incorporated into the design. And then we also talked conceptually about lighting the sign, and the idea with the multiple panels is that actually in between the two panels might be separated, and we might uplight that back panel. And then there also might be separate either indirect lighting of the front panel, or the individual letters of Canyon City might be illuminated. So all of those things are still to be worked out. And so that was the basic concept behind sort of taking the concept from the committee and doing an initial modification to that. So we'll say that's option 1A. So option 1B, and this was some of the direction from the staff group that's been meeting with the consultant, we wanted to explore some different options with colors on some of these signs. And so that's what you're seeing reflected here. So basically 1B, the only change is really exploring and utilizing the purple color that's in the city seal as potentially that primary panel color. So that's the only difference between those two options. So on the one on the left might be a Corten panel or other material as the primary panel, but more of a brown coloring. And the one on the right is more of a purple panel color, a la the purple in the city seal. So another option, option 2A, for that Eastern Gateway Monument is having more of a, I guess, formalized base, so a stacked ashlar base that either could add a column element onto it or just be the base itself with a strong horizontal line. And so anything below that strong horizontal line would work and be built into the landscape, whereas the panels themselves might be totally exposed above the landscape. And all of that is just yet to be figured out depending on the exact location and topography where the sign goes. So again, here you're seeing an idea of two panels. The layering idea is still consistent here. Another item that's different in this option is retaining or bringing back the squiggle that's representative of the river in that sign panel on the front panel in that particular case. So that's really the major differences in option 2A, which has a pillar, and 2B, which would just be the strong horizontal base. And the other thing to note, and so now this is looking at different coloring within that option 2. So the option 2 that has either the pillar or the more regular ashlar base as part of the design, the consultants put together different color options. So the one on the left basically illustrates the purple color as the primary panel color, a la the city seal. And then the option on the right looks at a black for that front panel as one of the options that the group wanted to have looked at. And again, this is where I reference caution in coloring, because even though the intent is that this is a true black, just based on how the drawings are coming up and presenting, I actually added this square on, which is a true black. So you can see that this is actually coming out and looking more like a sort of a 95% black, a little bit of an off black. But the intent is that that's black. So those are just different color options within option 2 for the Eastern Gateway. So then moving to the Western Gateway, and there were conversations about having a monument sign basically exactly like the Eastern Gateway sign, and there were also conversations about, well, maybe this is an opportunity to do something a little bit different, again, based on unique topography and existing conditions on the western side of the community. And so based on that, the consultants actually proposed more of a vertical pillar option for the Western Gateway as you're coming into town. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, if that sign is moved to the west side of the highway or the right side as you're driving in and coming into town, the topography actually drops off there from the level of the road. So having a vertical element would help accentuate a gateway sign a little bit more and have it be a little bit more prevalent. The other idea behind the concept was to also be able to potentially straddle the existing trail that's there and a potential trail extension that might eventually connect up to the gorge and allow people to actually pass through that as a gateway for somebody actually on foot or on a bike, as you can see in the renderings here. And the third component to that, to the two separate pillars, is sort of a la the V and trying to be representative of the gorge. So there were multiple components of why this option was considered in this refined movement from the consultants. So different variations of that. The options that you all see on this slide are proposing basically a 2-panel option again. The first panel here, in this case, being that brown color, so it potentially could be Corten steel. And then you're just seeing different options of how a buff sandstone might be applied as a base in those different scenarios. And basically what you're seeing on top is an elevation drawing and then sort of a simulation on the bottom of what that might look like in place. The one thing noted here, this proximity to, sorry, the mouse is not responding as much as I would like. The reality is that it wouldn't be as close to the existing pavement as you see here. The important element that's being represented here is the idea of the two pillars basically flanking a multi-use trail and passing through that trail. The reality is it probably would need to be pushed back further from the right-of-way to meet CDOT standards, so just keep that in mind.
And it also provided photo opportunities as well.
Right, so photo ops for folks to stop and take pictures of the family and on trips with Canyon City and the Gateway and the mountains in the background. So to move into the material a little bit, just so folks get a sense of what we're talking about, I pulled several images of signs that have Corten steel, so you just get a flavor of what that material would look like for that particular option for that front panel. And so these are just some various signs that I pulled that show that materiality of Corten steel in signage. And then here's some additional images of what that would look like. And then this image actually gives you a sense of how, how that material basically ages, sort of similar to copper. It gets a patina over time, so it gets that sort of rusted brown patina over time. So those images I pulled just so you get a sense of that material for that option. And then in terms of what we've been talking about in terms of the sticking to the geology of our region and what's common here, the idea of having that buff sandstone potentially used as a base for these signs, and the fact that we know that there's everywhere we go on the trails and look around, we see that uplifting that's occurred over time. And so that's the concept in some of the signs where you see that buff sandstone being applied more at an angular fashion. So I wanted to provide those images for you. So then moving on to different options for that Western Gateway sign. Again, exploring different panel colors, the black and the purple. So basically the one on the left here is illustrating a potential black front panel color. The one on the right is indicating a purple as a front panel color. And then this is just a variation again, things that can be worked out, and we can talk a little bit if there's any preferences in terms of how a stone base might be applied to the sign. Oop, one more to talk about. And so then another comment that came out, and we didn't have an elevation drawing of this, just the simulation drawing. Another concept that came out was looking to some of the initial concepts the consultants had provided, where they had a bridge component, which is what you see on the lower right here. So it's sort of the upside down inverted Royal Gorge Bridge. And so some folks wanted to see what that might look like, actually creating something to walk under. And so they provided that option as a third option for the Western Gateway. And so that's a little bit different than what was in the hard copy packets. Because what was in the hard copy packets, they actually simply had copied and pasted in what they had done at the initial level, and that wasn't the desired focus moving forward from the staff group. So hopefully this is more representative of that. So then we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, just to reiterate that the idea is that for the secondary gateway standpoint, so a la the intersection at 16th/15th coming into town, we could then scale down one of those gateway monuments and have that placed at that location and replace the existing sign that's there, again, having that consistency in the aesthetics and in the signage and the landscape. So then another component of gateway monuments is district monuments. So the consultant also put together
these district monuments that are more a la the vertical pillar component. And the idea is that they would, I'll jump forward here, for instance, be located at entry points to key districts. So this is showing, for example, how one of those district monuments might be located at basically First and Main Street. So that hopefully in the future, when people are arriving on US 50 and we're able to get them to pause and have a decision point, that they might turn right and go to a riverfront district in the future. And so there might be a pillar indicating riverfront district, or go to the left and come to the historic Main Street and come to the historic district. And so there would be another district marker at that location.
That particular one's not to scale, is it?
It is, actually. Yep. Those would be fairly large. They're meant to be a district marker.
Well, and that's pending the decision that council makes.
Right. I mean, they could be, it could be scaled down slightly, it could be scaled up, et cetera. And this was also from their earlier packet, so. But to go back to those, so again, they just looked at different options in terms of the materiality. So you're seeing the brown is the front panel. Again, all of these have kind of a two-panel. That layering option is being continued forward in the design of the signs. And this one, the front panel, has that potential Corten steel panel or other brown-like material. This is exploring the black option. This is exploring the purple color from the city seal. And then you can see just different options about how a base might be formulated around that. Again, something a little bit more informal with an uplifting movement, or something more horizontal yet informal, and or even bringing in the component of that one Eastern Gateway sign in terms of a even more kind of formalized base component to it. So now we're going to shift and we're moving into the directional wayfinding signs. So it's important to remember that some
Just
of these...
as a point of information, it might be better if you make a decision, since it's fresh in your mind, on the monument signs before we go to directional, because I think it's going to be an overload.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, and plus our decision on wayfinding
Yeah.
might depend what we decide for the gateways.
Oh, you might change your mind after seeing them. Sure, we can jump forward here.
Because you got a lot of choices and comparisons just on the monument signs.
Could we get some lights at least back here on the dais so we can see our pages? That's a little bit better.
As good as it gets.
That's good. That's good right there.
Go ahead, leave those off if you would. That helps there, but these will come on here pretty quick. They're just warming up.
Warming up.
So leave these off, please. Thank you.
Is everybody awake?
Yeah. Are there any initial reactions from council members on a preference?
Yes.
Well, let's go down the row and go ahead. We'll start with you, Dolly.
Okay, I prefer the third slide, 1, 2, 3. So from left to right, 1, 2, 3.
So this is, so just to let you know what you're looking at, so this is a summary. I put all of the Eastern Gateway Monument options on one slide. So what you're looking at is, in terms of basically option number 1, is the idea of 2 layers with a more informal, kind of the uplifting of the buff sandstone worked into the landscape. And then there's different color options, or generally going with B, which is the ashlar stack base, with the river component. And then within that, again, there's options of pillar, no pillar, and the colors.
So you like the Canyon City with the pillar on
With the pillar, but not in purple, in brown,
in
or
brown.
black.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mayor?
It's the one down in the corner, right?
No.
The black one?
Nope,
The
number
one
three.
right in the
Very
middle.
good.
Ryan
Ryan
can
has that
play
down.
Vanna White. Can you go up there and just point out? 'Cause
That's what
just-
I'm
just
trying to
make
do.
sure.
She's got her mouse on it.
Yeah.
Her mouse is there, yeah. There's a laser pointer. Who has that? Yeah,
Okay,
Jean.
Mayor?
Ryan's far more photogenic
Layer messed
than a
up the
mouse.
We've been advised to try to use the pointer of the mouse for the
that
video,
one.
but
There.
I'll use both. So here's the mouse. So
Okay, so
and then
Mayor,
here's
what's
the-
your preference?
That one, is that where?
Yes,
Okay.
In black.
in black.
Is it my turn yet?
Yes.
Okay,
but
well,
ready for
price
it.
coffee. I need attention. Number one, I like the irregular stack because it looks like that uplift that we have going on in town. All the other ones just seem a little formal, but I could be convinced for the one with the chimney on it.
I think that was a concern of the staff, that the number 3 can look like a chimney
Okay.
stack. I also prefer number 1 because it embraces it's celebrating the nature and the natural aspect of our community that we really value, and I
Bless you.
like the more casual stack. But I would like it better if it had the river running through it as well. Hamrick?
So I like the brown, and I like number 1 also. I like that idea of the stack. And these are going to, what's going to be the spacing between the plates?
Yet to be determined. We just need, so we wanted direction on the basic design, and then from this point, we will get much more specific dimensions of the signs, and they'll then explore what the appropriate spacing of the panels might be.
And so I like number 1, I like the brown. I don't have an opinion about the river or not. I mean, I'm good either way.
Okay.
First question on the Corten material. If you did that, how would you then, you couldn't, the Canyon City would have to be a different lettering that's implanted on that, because you couldn't paint or anything on that because it would stain it. Is that not correct?
Right, so those would probably be individual punched letters that would be applied onto
Okay.
the panel.
With
And
that
they
in
could
mind.
be backlit too.
With that in mind, my choice would be 1, because I like the concept of the cordon and the maintenance of that. I think the river makes the whole thing too busy, and as John Doe drives down the highway, I don't even know that they would know what that blue stripe would mean. It only means something, I think, to the residents of Canyon City. But my choice would be the top left.
Okay, and Caitlin?
Well, I'm with Dolly. I really, first of all, I like the brown color. I think that's, I just like the look of the Corten steel. And I think the font on that number 3, I guess we're calling it, is easier to read than the font in number 1. It just looks larger on the sign.
And I think, and that's something we can work with the consultants as
Okay,
well. So,
all right. And I
yep.
like the river. I mean, yeah, I like the blue stripe.
And just apropos of nothing, there's various radioactive substances that'll make those letters really pop.
They're already in the community.
Yeah.
Bring them up.
So was there a consensus?
Still have bigger I think there's room for bigger lettering.
Right.
On number 1.
Yeah.
Just
So we have
1, 2, 3, 4 1s and 2
the
3s.
ones prevail.
Dolly and Caitlin, are you comfortable moving forward with number 1?
I am. It's,
I think if we make the lettering bigger, I'd be comfortable. Because I really do think the lettering on the other sign is just easier to read. And we want it to be
I agree with you.
Yep.
Yeah.
easy to read from the road.
Absolutely.
And everyone preferred the brown versus the purple?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I prefer the purple, but I think the brown's more practical and more economical long-term.
yeah.
Well, it also matches our mountains.
Well, theoretically, depending on
Yeah,
what time you
somewhat.
look at them.
Yeah. So if you're comfortable moving forward, let's go with number 1 with larger lettering. River or no river?
I don't think, if we're going to make the letters larger, I don't think we go
So
with the river.
no river?
No.
Hamrick, river or no river?
I would, if I was going to choose, I'd say no river, but
I already know you say no. And then Turner?
she's a river.
Well, I did like the river, but if we make the letters larger and we still want to accommodate room for potentially having a motto or a tagline, we'd probably want to leave space for that.
Yeah, I would having done this several times, I would strongly advise against a motto. They change constantly, and it commercializes the sign. This is really, an identification of the community, and it's supposed to be timeless. You start putting on gimmicky mottos and marketing sayings, you really undermine the whole purpose of it.
Well, and plus the reason why we left it out in the first place is
Yeah.
because nobody can agree on what that.
Yeah, and it
is gonna
changes. I
be.
mean, the next council can change it, and it just becomes like a billboard.
And education for the council
Yeah.
is, one of the key components of this whole thing was that our current signage is dated,
Yeah.
and we want something that's timeless.
Timeless,
I mean, that was a really critical component
Exactly.
of the presentation, and I think council, is that we wanted something that was theoretically timeless, which I don't know that that's possible.
No, it is. I mean, a number of you are going to the CML. You'll see that in Vail, but particularly in Beaver Creek. The use of black granite and classical lettering is very timeless. It's been up there for over a decade, and you wouldn't think it.
Because we can't afford to remove it.
Partially true.
Okay, so I think we'll move forward with Wen, Brown, no river. Although if it's not a huge deal, I would just like to see a rendering of if they can make a
Yes,
river look in there, if
I
it's
agree.
not too busy, and see what the
Yeah.
consultants think about it.
Yeah, we
Just-
can ask them.
Just for kicks.
Yep.
No, I think it's critical that for us to see a final,
Yeah,
Oh,
because what I don't
absolutely.
want is in another 6 months,
no.
us hashing this out again. I want to
Yeah.
see something we can say, go forward.
Yeah.
get
They'll be
something done.
built.
Do you know, I know the consultant was out of town, but can they bring us back something for the June 18th meeting? Because technically, they can't vote tonight. So technically, we have to bring this back at a meeting where they can give us a vote. And hopefully, we'll have the final renderings for you. Is that doable?
Well, I know they're out all week this week at their,
Yeah,
the national
conference.
conference.
Why
Well,
don't you
give
follow
them
up
a
on that?
heads up now that when they get home, they need
Worst
to get
case,
the shuttle to
text
Do you
them.
have a special meeting that we proposed for June 28th for the interviewing of the candidates? We should definitely get it in there because we need to do it before you leave town.
This has been dragging on
Yeah.
forever. It's
Yeah.
time to get some
So
movement.
either the 18th or the 28th. We'll bring it back.
I told Tony I'd like to see this done before my term's over.
Probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
We're gonna get some
We can get a
results.
gravestone.
So, Gravestone.
Okay, and these I...
Western Gateway.
Yep, these I can enlarge as we're walking through them, but, so just quickly, they're all pretty similar. The difference is, what's the front panel? Is it the Corten or the brown? Is it black? Is it purple? And then just how the base is treated. I mean, and now we've made some decisions on the previous Eastern monument, so that might influence. And then whether folks like the idea of just of the two individual pillars or panels, or like this idea of introducing something to actually cover that up, which is the image in the upper right. So I can enlarge any of these if you want me to zoom in.
First of all, are you guys comfortable with a whole different look on the Western Gateway?
Well,
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense because the River Rock is right there, so I understand why it looks different, but.
Okay.
I think, I concur, is that I like how the Eastern Gateway sign is relative to the terrain and aesthetics there and kind of matches that. And I think this complements the same thing as we come in from the western edge of the city, is the people that see this sign may never see the other sign. As you're leaving town and
Okay, so
Get your eyes
let's
closed
go
into
ahead
the
and go
sun.
through and vote, but we'll start on the other side this time. So we'll start with you, Caitlin.
Oh, gosh. So I do kind of like the inverted bridge, and I hadn't really been thinking about people who want selfies, but that's something that's very popular right now. I don't know if that's timeless, but for a photo op, the inverted bridge is a really nice choice. But other than that, I like I can't tell on the screen there which one I'd be looking at, but on my sheet, I guess it'd be maybe option 2A. I like when the left-hand side has just this Canyon City on it without the map. And then I don't know if we like the idea of having the Riverwalk Trail map on the right-hand side or having it say welcome. I think I'd be fine with either. But I'd want to stick with the brown since we went with brown for the eastern entry.
Okay.
So on the idea of the second pillar or welcome versus no welcome, I know we did receive feedback from the consultants. They didn't think we needed to have the word welcome on the pillar. The other thing to consider in terms of the signage component is it could be on either side of the pillar. So something else to consider.
So you're saying it could be welcome on one side and then the river
Map on the other side. Yep. And the map obviously would be more at pedestrian level and at a much smaller scale.
What's the purpose of that map? I just made the assumption that that map was relative to the trail there.
Right, so it's basically
You're here?
providing trail information as a component to the sign
Okay.
without having a separate trail sign.
Is it my turn? Are you done?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my choice would be the slanted, whatever you call that, rock in the brown to match the other one, even though you won't see them. And then
Is that 2A?
I like the one that, option 2A, that has the slanted rock that does not go all the way to the edge of the sign.
Right, so 2A, this one.
2A.
Yep.
And then I also like,
More
relative to that, the river trail information that winds up being dual purpose kind of. You're not going to see that information from a vehicle, but if you're walking on the trail, I think that then becomes a more of a local little directional type of sign, whatever you call those.
Mm-hmm.
So my choice would be 2A, brown, rocks halfway off, right-hand side, local information.
And welcome or no welcome?
I like the welcome, but at the same point in time, if I choose between the welcome and somebody walking there with the trail information, I think my preference would be with the trail information.
Okay.
But if it could be both, would you want both? So just to reiterate, so the option you see on the far left here, here's just another way that pedestrian bike level trail information is integrated into the overall sign. And as I mentioned, that trail information could potentially be on the back side of the welcome pillar.
Well, I
So there's
guess
different options.
when I come back to that if we welcoming those from the west, why aren't we welcoming those from the east? I
They're
think
leaving.
sometimes less is better. I just like the
Yep.
monumental concept that just those images bring about.
Yep, so no
That
unwelcome.
You don't have to necessarily fill them up.
No welcome.
Well, yeah, I'm still back to no welcome. I mean,
Okay.
Okay.
So, okay, boy, whew,
yeah.
this is worse than ordering for a car full of people at McDonald's.
Except for in my minivan. And I've really mastered that, ordering for 8 people at McDonald's.
So I'm good with the rocks that don't go all the way across. I like the brown. I do like the welcome. I think, I'm not too hung up on whether we do it both the same both ways or not. I mean, but I do like the idea of the V and the welcome and the brown, and the rocks part way across.
Okay,
So I also prefer 2A, and I'm probably leaning towards no welcome just for the simplicity of the sign. But I could go both ways. Mayor,
I like the bridge,
you like the inverted bridge?
brown, partially over.
And
So-
that kind
so
of
2A
incorporates
with
this
the-
another sign. So maybe, well, let's see what Dolly says, and then we can look at the both.
I like the bridge, too.
Okay, so can we compare the bridge with 2A? Since we've narrowed it down.
And here's why. I think it kind of breaks up. I mean, I appreciate the fact of incorporating our landscape, but I think it kind of breaks it up and it brings purpose to our community, that we embrace the bridge and we embrace, we embrace our tourism and we embrace people into our community. So,
Is there some reason the bridge is inverted?
Yeah, I was wondering if if it could not be inverted, if you flipped it so that the high part could be on the Canyon City side, and then it would come down to the other side. So it actually mimic the actual bridge.
So it looks like the bridge
So it
instead
actually
of...
looks like the bridge.
Otherwise, it's really, to me, I like the idea of having the bridge on it, but I don't like the idea of the inverted bridge.
Well, it depends on inversion, I think. I mean, if you look at the cable structure of the bridge, that's appropriate. So, the bottom cable. I mean, that's what I'm seeing, is the bottom cable of that. Do you know?
But
do you
it'd be
know how
more
to-
obvious if it was
It's the opposite. It's
actually-
not a suspension bridge, the way
Yeah.
it's inverted from the way the Royal Gorge Bridge
The way
is.
it is that we have a suspension bridge, and so the cables are on top.
But they're also on the bottom.
But
I don't think so.
those are just minor supports
Mhm.
versus sort of the major structure of the bridge.
Mayor, what would you think if we flipped it over so it's not inverted, but it would actually look
And then
like
put the welcome
the
on the
bridge?
bottom?
And then the welcome could be
Go in like
underneath.
this.
That way you get the welcome and the river.
I'd flip forward. Yeah, why not? I mean, I see it as part, because I,
See it going right here?
sure, flip it.
It keeps the
See what it
bridge
looks
from
like.
swaying.
If you want to welcome, you can always put it on the other
It's
one.
less structural than it is swaying.
Yeah.
Well, and the bridge is timeless. It's going to be here forever.
We hope.
Yeah.
Good money.
Well, it tried to go away. It didn't.
So you have any consensus then on?
So how would you guys feel? Do you want to have an opinion about if we flipped it to look like an actual bridge? Would you prefer that, or do you want to see renderings of both?
Well, I think
was-
because we're
Oh.
probably really close here, it probably makes sense to give us a final rendering of 2A. Is that what we,
And then 2A with the bridge flipped.
and then,
Okay.
option 4.
Well, 4 in our pamphlet is different.
It's different. It's
That's
not the
very
same.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, oh, I see, that is drastic.
How come they took out the steel? Oh, I see. Never mind. I get it.
So
The
I've got,
reason
so
why it changed 4
Can you
went away, because it
enlarge-
looked
can you
really
enlarge that?
industrial, and it was
It's-
hard. Yeah.
Is that as big as you can do?
it's flipping to a different slide. Can try one more time here. It's being
I
a little-
didn't, I guess, necessarily realize that the paperwork was different than the photo now that
Are you confused yet?
I'm confused. That's okay.
I still like this one better than number 4.
I probably am more inclined to buy that bridge than the bridge that's in our paperwork, but I think there's some value in seeing it inverted from where it's at.
So similar to the Eastern Gateway, where we have a preference, but we're still going to look at a variation.
For Kate,
Here
just
again, we have a
to make sure we
preference,
make
and
the
we'll
right
look at a
decision.
variation.
So when we have the, will we take the welcome off of the bridge sign then? 'Cause
Well, it could technically go underneath if you wanted.
Yeah.
What's on top there?
This is welcome.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Which I don't know if we need the welcome, because it's simpler is better, maybe.
Clean, timeless.
Yeah.
I mean, if you flipped it over and everybody said, hey, I like it, I could go along with it, but my preference would be with
Bring
not.
in the variation on the theme.
So we'll bring it with variation. Do you want the variation with the bridge with the welcome or without the welcome?
Yeah,
Just go around.
Let's decide on the welcome.
Yes, no?
I think I could go without.
No? No?
Yes.
Yes?
No.
No?
No.
And I say no. All right, so we're good with that? Yep. So are we ready? Do we need to talk about a secondary wayfinding or monument sign? Because in the recommendation here, it said that they didn't think we needed it, it would just add clutter. What are your guys' feelings on having a replacement sign at Papa Murphy's, where, it has that older sign there? Do we need to have another mini monument sign there?
A different.
That's money.
Yeah, but shouldn't that be more of a directional sign there to getting people downtown? I mean, making the assumption that the access plan goes through, is that even appropriately located now?
So there's a whole separate map that indicates where all of the directional and wayfinding signage will go. So the consultants are also working on that. Their thought was that since that juncture to the community, it's like it's coming into the core of the community, into the downtown area, the greater downtown, that they felt comfortable having a smaller version of the monument sign at that location. There would also be, and I don't have that information with me, but very close to that location, as you're traveling westbound, one of those directional wayfinding signs. And that would be out closer to US 50.
Practically and financially, we see this as a phase 2.
Yeah.
You're not going to have enough money to do both monument signs and any wayfinding and that. So I think that's something you can address in phase 2 of this whole program. If we can get the monument signs in and some of the wayfinding, we're in good shape.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we're just stretching this beyond our capacity to pay for any of
So
this.
let's move on from that in
Yeah.
the interest of time.
Yeah.
And let's go to our wayfinding signs. We have several options.
Don't we need to do district?
Oh, district.
Again, that's another, if you want, I would,
That's also phase 2.
phase 2.
Phase 2, okay.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to afford that.
All right.
I
Nice
imagine phase
concept.
2 would be
Well, based on
that would
the
be very similar to whatever we choose.
Yeah, I mean,
for
based
our
on what I've
Western
been
monument.
hearing on that, I would say it's basically the first one you see here,
Yeah,
but
it's
with more of
consistent
the
with your
informal
monument.
base.
Yeah,
That's what I was, are you,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Well-
go,
Why did they reverse the rock thing there on 2?
I think just to give you different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So you would ask that question.
Well, I know, but it's just distracting.
They're just giving you options. They're giving you
Yeah, yeah.
options. So are we okay with having it the same as our Western monument? We'll just go around, start with you, Dolly.
1.
Yes?
Yes, I'm good. 1.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes, so long as the slant is reversed from what we see in picture 2.
You prefer the left to right downward slant?
Well, I just think it's more indicative of, I think.
Well, it's consistency. I mean,
Yeah, it's
just
going
a
to be consistent
consistency
with the
thing.
other side, or consistent with the other side.
All right, so
And-
Turner?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
good.
okay, so let's get to wayfinding.
And this would be
signs.
part of phase 2, just to make it
Yeah.
clear.
Yep.
So when we bid this out, we have your priority.
As a point of clarification, in our conversations, they talked about maybe steering away from brown, because brown is already used by the outdoor recreation, and that we maybe needed something to define Canyon City as being Canyon City. And so that's why they recommended the black. And it also had better contrast between black and white to make better readability and a little bit more timeless and classic. So I just wanted an explanation for that.
Right, and they repeated several times that the overall community gateway signs do not need to have the same primary panel as the downtown,
Yeah.
the district signage and the wayfinding directional that we're about to review.
I mean, if I had to buy into that theory, I just would blacklist. I don't know. I could maybe swing with the gray of taking and twisting my arm, but
Do you prefer the brown?
personally, yeah.
Well, that's
I mean, I
something,
realize
that's a
they're saying
conversation that we can
We shouldn't
have.
have consistency, but
So basically, we have option 1. Let's narrow it down between option 1, 2, and
Are you talking about
3.
the wayfinding directional?
Yeah, do you
How
want to
about-
give
how
us
about I
some
walk through
introduction
that?
on that? And I have to get out fairly soon, so if we can maybe.
I understood 1, 2, and 3 was different locations.
No, so just really quickly, overview on the directional wayfinding signage. So basically, option 1 is showing a black background, or what's intended to be a black background.
Well, and also the blue and purple
That's what I'm,
mimicking our seal.
right. So the difference here is there's 2 layers on the top with a straight dividing line. So the goldenrod, again, from the city seal, is straight across the top with 2 layers of color on the top of the sign with a black background. Moving to option 2 was exploring a gray background option. The top here is 1 layer of color instead of 2, and it has a curve at the top a la the river. So that's the main difference there. And then the third one is a side mount sign that includes an inverted bridge component and has a different pole design.
So that would complement, if we chose the bridge for our western gateway, it would kind of complement that. So could we at least narrow down between 1, 2, and 3, and then we could talk about colors from there? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so Dahlia, let's start on your side this time.
I prefer option 1 with the historic downtown pole.
Oh, and well, I
Yeah,
should
let's do some
mention,
clarification. Yeah.
right, so point of
Oh, I see.
clarification on the polls, that there could potentially be a different application of the poll. So when these are used in the historic downtown, they would ideally be on existing poles to try to minimize new poles coming in, so hence that option showing the historic poles. If it's in East Canyon out on US 50, it might be more of the simple pole that you see on the left-hand side. And then the third option is that sign face potentially having a wooden pole when it's applied, say, up at the Royal Gorge Park.
Okay.
So your
I
option
prefer
1,
option 1.
Mayor?
The middle group with the blue and the historic, of course, the base. You're not going to use it in East Canyon, like you said, but I like the blue. It says Canyon City. It's readable. I don't think those you can read. If you want Canyon City, make it so it's readable with the wavy deal.
You like the wave?
Yes. Go with the wave.
I would vote for 1 with the wave.
What do you mean the
Like
wave?
2C?
That's the line.
On 2,
Oh,
It has-
I do like the wave. Yeah. I didn't notice that they had like the wave. Okay.
Like 2C?
Just,
Well,
no,
except for I
not
like-
2C, 2B, because it's just blue, right?
well, no, but I like option 1 because it has the multicolor of purple and blue, but maybe it needs to be the white writing so you could
Did you
see
see
it better.
See it.
Oh,
That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
2C?
2C. Thank you. All right, what's your vote? Thank you both so much, from the bottom of my heart.
2C,
2C?
2C. And do I need to specify a pole base?
No.
Oh, is he done? Where are we at?
You're with you, please.
I go 2C.
I like 2C as well.
Okay. And what about the coloring versus gray background, black background, or brown?
I like 2C.
Can I change my vote? I like 2C, but with the black.
You like black?
Uh-huh.
Mayor, what background do you
Are
like?
you a Raiders fan?
Well, I like the brown.
You like brown?
No, I'm not. What?
So black, brown, I'm voting black,
Brown.
brown,
Even though Brown's not here, I want Brown.
and Turner.
I like the black.
So you got a tie.
Well, let's
Yeah, you
ask our
can't
staff who participated on it. What colors, Stevens?
Well, can we do another rendering of black and brown?
Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah, that would be a good
And
idea.
again,
Not to take away from your opinion,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that that would be
Yeah.
another option. If we're
Yeah.
down to 2,
yeah.
let's have an A and a B so that we're not confused.
And when you're
Yeah.
in, at CML, I'll take you to Beaver Creek. Those are all black.
Take pictures for me.
Well, yeah.
I
So
would
you can see
still,
them.
I would still like you just to hear what you guys have to say.
They're all black.
Yeah.
I would prefer the black.
Black is
Black.
classic,
Yeah.
Black.
classic.
And as I tried to clarify with the consultant today, since the black really wasn't black in the information that they sent, they said it's still to be worked out. So even though it could look black, it might still be a 95% black. They haven't picked their specific black, so. But the idea that it's black is we can forward that on to them.
Yeah. Well,
So
why don't we
we'll
bring you
bring these
then
in
both
Okay.
for the 18th
I
and
guess
28th?
along with
'cause
that,
Frank's
is
missing.
what are we talking about durability of a black with our 286 sunshine days
Well,
versus?
The Beeve has it. I mean, just so much sunshine. It's been there for almost 10 years. They look brand new. You'll
Well,
see them.
And these signs would get rotated more often, like the gateways, I mean, they're going to be there for decades and
Yeah.
decades. These will have more likelihood of needing replacement as well, based on location.
Properly manufactured, they have a very long life without, requiring.
But we
you
would like
do
to,
them.
if they have some feedback on that, on the durability of colors That would be good to know in our decision-making
Yep.
process.
Okay.
Great.
Is there anything else that we need to know? I would like to say that I do like the wooden base on concept 3 better than the other concepts. It's a little bit more fun. How it has a little bit more,
The side,
yeah.
off to the side.
Well, not necessarily off to the side, but like the base, the
Yeah.
bottom of it.
Maybe we can
There's more
bring the
detail.
two options back to you with the different types of bases.
So Ashley, are you saying you wouldn't want the different bases depending on where the sign was located?
No, just like, well,
should be
so we
uniform.
decided we like 2C best, but on the river, like if we have a river district pole, on one, the river district pole is just a plain wood.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked how on 3, the wood has a little bit more, it looks a little bit nicer. It has a
Character.
little bit of black added to it.
Yeah. We can give you different examples of the two choices you've made based upon the other options.
So you wouldn't want a cap on that. You're not talking about having a cap on that center post. I mean, the post
No,
on 3
no.
has a
I'm just
cap.
talking about the bottom, or just,
Okay.
yeah,
Just the
Yeah,
pole
'cause
in
you wouldn't want that post
Decorative.
above the center of that sign.
right.
Not repositioning the sign,
Yeah,
just using the pole,
make it look better
A
than
more
just a
decorative
plain,
post.
just better than just plain
Yeah.
wood.
plain pole.
Plain.
Good.
Just for everybody's information, I did look at some wayfinding signs at Durango, and they just stuck them on the light poles.
And that's an option too. if you're-
That's what we have
Mm-hmm.
here.
With duct tape?
Yeah.
And part of the sign, it also will be talking a lot about taking down a lot of the old signs that need to
Right.
be taken down, consolidating signs into, instead of so
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you
many
gotta
separate
lose
ones, consolidating them into,
4 or 5
I
generations.
thought we didn't have
of
any.
signs.
That was the statement
That one
a year ago, is we didn't have any.
Well, actually, we have more than you think, and you wouldn't
Oh,
realize
yeah.
it, because we just block it out.
Yeah, there's tons of
They're
them out
right
there.
down here on 9th
Tons of them.
and
Yeah.
Highway 50, there's a whole conglomerate.
Every conceivable
You just don't
generation is
notice,
still
like,
out there.
Overload, you just don't,
Yeah,
or you've
you
seen
don't
it
You
so
can
many
carbon
times.
date the city based upon our signage.
All right,
Just telling you.
do we have the direction that we need to move
Yeah.
this forward?
So we'll bring this back to either the 18th, sounds like maybe more likely the 28th. So we need to make sure that's an action item on that agenda in addition to your interviews.
Excellent.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much for the whole committee. I know you guys have spent a lot of time on this, and we really appreciate your time, but also the community members who originally started this. Okay, I think we're going to adjourn.
initials on the signs.
Thanks, Dina.